In the heart of New York City, where skyscrapers touched the clouds and life moved at a breakneck pace, there lived a woman named Maria. She wasn't rich or famous, far from it. Maria was a cleaning lady in her late 40s, someone who spent her days working tirelessly to make ends meet. Every morning she woke up before sunrise, packed her supplies into an old tote bag, and headed out to clean apartments in some of the most luxurious buildings in Manhattan. Her clients were wealthy people with big bank accounts and even bigger egos, but Maria didn't care about their money. All she wanted was to do her job well and provide for her family. Maria had been doing this work for over 2 decades. Over time, she'd learned how to read people quickly, their moods, their quirks, and sometimes their secrets. Wealthy people often let things slip when they thought no one was listening. They assumed that someone like Maria wouldn't pay attention, or wouldn't dare say anything if she did hear something unusual. But Maria wasn't just any cleaning lady. Beneath her quiet demeanor lay sharp instincts honed by years of observing human behavior. One chilly Tuesday morning, Maria arrived at a high-rise building on Fifth Avenue. It was a place she visited twice a week to clean the penthouse apartment of Adrian Carter, a self-made billionaire known for his tech empire. Adrian wasn't your typical billionaire. He wasn't flashy or loud. Instead, he preferred staying out of the spotlight, focusing more on his business than parties or red carpets. Still, his penthouse reflected his success. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, marble floors so shiny you could see your reflection, and artwork worth millions hanging on the walls. As Maria entered the apartment that day, she noticed something different right away. The air felt tense, charged with an energy she couldn't quite put her finger on. She started her usual routine, dusting shelves, vacuuming rugs, and wiping down surfaces. But as she worked her way toward the study, she heard raised voices coming from inside. Normally, she tried to stay out of earshot during these moments, knowing better than to eavesdrop. But today, something made her pause. Through the slightly ajar door, Maria caught snippets of a heated argument between Adrian and his wife, Victoria. Their tones were sharp, cutting through the silence like knives. "You're always working," Victoria snapped, her voice dripping with frustration. "If you don't come with me this weekend on our trip to Aspen, I swear I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are." Maria froze mid-motion, her hand gripping the feather duster tightly. There was something unsettling about the way Victoria spoke. Not just angry, but calculated, almost threatening. Maria strained to hear more, but the conversation shifted, to murmurs too low for her to catch. Shaking off the unease, she continued cleaning, trying to convince herself it wasn't her business. After all, she was just here to do her job. Later that afternoon, Adrian emerged from the study looking pale and distracted. His usual calm demeanor was replaced by a furrowed brow and a distant gaze. As Maria tidied up the living room, she hesitated for a moment. Should she say something? What if she was wrong? But then again, what if she wasn't? Taking a deep breath, Maria approached him cautiously. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, choosing her words carefully. "Please be careful if you decide to travel with your wife. Sometimes, people aren't who they seem." Adrian turned to look at her, surprise flickering across his face. For a brief second, Maria feared she'd overstepped her boundaries, but then he nodded slowly as though considering her words. "Thank you," he said simply, his tone thoughtful. With that, he walked away, leaving Maria standing there wondering if she'd done the right thing. She finished her work and left the penthouse without another word. On her way home, Maria replayed the scene in her mind. Had she imagined the tension? Was she reading too much into Victoria's words? Or had she stumbled upon something far darker than she realized? Little did she know, her simple warning would set off a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. That night, as Maria sat in her small kitchen sipping tea, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd planted a seed, one that might grow into something neither she nor Adrian could have anticipated. The next day, Maria woke up with a strange feeling in her chest. She couldn't stop thinking about the warning she had given to Adrian Carter. Was it too bold? Too intrusive? After all, she was just a cleaning lady. What right did she have to interfere in his personal life? But as much as she tried to convince herself that it wasn't her place, something deep inside her wouldn't let go of the unease she'd felt when she overheard Victoria's words. Maria decided to push those thoughts aside and focus on her work. Life didn't leave much room for second-guessing, especially for someone like her. Still, as she made her way to Adrian's penthouse later that morning, she couldn't help but feel curious about whether he had taken her advice seriously or if he had dismissed it entirely. When Maria arrived, the apartment seemed quieter than usual. The grand space, usually buzzing with the hum of activity from housekeeping staff or visitors, felt eerily empty. As she worked her way through the rooms, she noticed subtle signs that something was off. A half-packed suitcase lay open in the corner of the master bedroom. Papers were scattered across the dining table, some marked with hastily scribbled notes. And then there was the tension in the air, a heaviness that clung to every surface, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Adrian appeared later in the afternoon, looking even more distracted than the day before. He moved around the apartment like a man lost in thought, his phone glued to his ear as he muttered under his breath. Maria kept her distance, not wanting to intrude, but she couldn't help overhearing fragments of his conversation. "I need answers by tonight," he said sharply into the phone. "No, I don't care how long it takes, just get it done." Curiosity gnawed at Maria. What was going on? Had her warning sparked something bigger? She wanted to ask, but she knew better than to pry. Instead, she focused on her tasks, sweeping and dusting while keeping one ear tuned to any clues that might explain the change in Adrian's demeanor. Later that evening, after Maria had finished her work and was packing up to leave, Adrian approached her. His expression was serious, almost grim, but there was also a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. "Maria," he began, his voice low and steady, "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday." Maria froze, unsure of what to expect. "Sir?" she replied cautiously, clutching her tote bag tightly. Adrian hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "You're right. People aren't always who they seem. Sometimes we miss the signs because we're too close to see them clearly." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I've decided to look into some things I probably should have questioned a long time ago." Maria nodded slowly, unsure of how to respond. She didn't want to push him further, but she could sense the weight of whatever burden he was carrying. "I hope everything works out for you, sir," she said finally, her tone gentle. "If there's anything else I can do." Adrian gave her a small, weary smile. "You've already done more than you know," he said softly. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Maria standing there with a mix of relief and lingering worry. On her way home, Maria replayed the conversation in her mind. What had Adrian meant by looking into things? Was he investigating Victoria? And if so, what exactly was he hoping to find? These questions swirled in her head, keeping her awake long after she'd settled into bed. Meanwhile, Adrian spent the night poring over documents and making calls. The private investigator he'd hired discreetly earlier that day sent him preliminary reports late in the evening. At first glance, the information seemed harmless enough: financial records, property deeds, social media profiles. But as Adrian dug deeper, patterns began to emerge, patterns that painted a picture far darker than he could have imagined. Victoria's past was riddled with inconsistencies. Her name wasn't even her real name. She had legally changed it years ago. Before marrying Adrian, she had been married twice before, and both of those marriages had ended abruptly under mysterious circumstances. In each case, her ex-husbands had vanished without a trace shortly after signing over significant assets to her. One of them had left behind a cryptic note hinting at foul play, though no concrete evidence had ever surfaced. Then there were the insurance policies. Adrian discovered that Victoria had recently purchased a massive life insurance policy on him, worth $50 million, with herself listed as the sole beneficiary. The timing of the purchase raised red flags. It coincided with the start of their marital troubles when Adrian had begun pulling away from her controlling grip. As Adrian sat in his dimly lit study, staring at the damning evidence spread out before him, a cold realization washed over him. Victoria wasn't just manipulative or controlling, she was dangerous. Every instinct screamed at him to act, but he knew he needed proof beyond doubt before confronting her directly. By dawn, Adrian had made his decision. He would gather irrefutable evidence and expose Victoria for who she truly was. But as he prepared for the battle ahead, he couldn't shake the memory of Maria's warning. If not for her courage to speak up, he might never have suspected anything was wrong. For the first time in years, Adrian felt a glimmer of clarity and gratitude. Little did either of them know. The events set in motion by Maria's simple act of bravery were about to spiral into something neither of them could have anticipated. The next morning, Maria woke up feeling a mix of curiosity and unease. She couldn't stop thinking about Adrian and the weight of his words from the previous evening. What had he meant when he said he was looking into things? Was he investigating Victoria? And if so, what exactly had he found? These questions buzzed in her mind like restless bees as she got ready for another day of work. When she arrived at the penthouse later that morning, something felt different right away. The atmosphere wasn't heavy or tense anymore, it was almost electric. As Maria stepped inside, she noticed an envelope taped to the front door. Her name was written neatly on it in bold black letters. Maria. She froze for a moment, staring at it. Who would leave her a note here? Surely not Adrian. He barely knew her beyond their brief interactions during her cleaning shifts. But there it was, waiting for her. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The message was short, but left her heart racing. Thank you for speaking up when no one else would. This is only the beginning. Maria read the note over and over again, trying to make sense of it. Was this some kind of prank? Or was Adrian behind it? Before she could dwell on it too much, she shook her head and reminded herself to focus on her job. After all, she was here to clean, not solve mysteries. As she worked her way through the apartment, dusting shelves and wiping down surfaces, she couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was about to happen. The penthouse seemed unusually quiet today, with none of the usual bustle of staff or visitors. It was just her, alone, in the sprawling space surrounded by luxury she could never imagine owning. By mid-morning, Maria decided to take a break and step out onto the balcony to clear her head. The view of Central Park always had a calming effect on her, a reminder that life went on outside these gilded walls. As she leaned against the railing, sipping water from her bottle, she heard a low rumble coming from below. At first, she thought, it might be a delivery truck or maybe even construction noise. But then the sound grew louder, deeper, more refined. Curious, Maria peeked over the edge of the balcony and gasped. Parked directly outside the building was a gleaming silver Rolls-Royce, Ghost. Its sleek curves caught the sunlight, making it look like a piece of art brought to life. Standing beside the car was none other than Adrian Carter himself, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, holding a bouquet of flowers. Maria blinked hard, convinced she must be dreaming. Why was he standing there with such an extravagant car, and why did he have flowers? Her confusion deepened as Adrian looked up toward the balcony and waved at her. For a split second she considered ducking out of sight, but it was too late. He'd already seen her. "Maria!" Adrian called out, his voice carrying upward. "Can you come down for a moment?" Her stomach churned with nerves. What could he possibly want? She hesitated for a few seconds before heading back inside and taking the elevator down to the lobby. When she stepped outside, the cool autumn air hit her face and she saw Adrian standing there, smiling warmly. "Good morning," he said, gesturing toward the car. "I hope you don't mind me surprising you like this." "Surprising me?" Maria stammered, still trying to process what was happening. "What's going on, sir?" Adrian chuckled softly. "Let's just say I wanted to thank you properly for trusting your instincts and for having the courage to speak up when it mattered most." Maria frowned, confused. But I didn't do anything special. Oh, but you did, Adrian interrupted gently. Your warning made me question things I should have questioned long ago. Because of you, I uncovered some truths that, well, let's just say they've changed everything. He paused, glancing at the Rolls-Royce before turning back to her. This car is yours, Maria. Consider it a token of gratitude for stepping forward when no one else would. Maria's jaw dropped. Mine? No, Mr. Carter, I can't accept this. It's too much. She waved her hands frantically, shaking her head. You don't need to do this. Adrian held up a hand, silencing her protests. Please hear me out. You deserve this. Not just because of what you did for me, but because of who you are. You're honest, hardworking, and brave. Those qualities are rare, and I want to show my appreciation in a meaningful way. Tears welled up in Maria's eyes as she struggled to find words. How could she possibly respond to something like this? A luxury car worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, just handed to her, out of nowhere. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie. I don't know what to say, she finally managed, her voice trembling. Thank you, but are you sure about this? Absolutely, Adrian replied firmly. And this is just the start. There's more to come, trust me. Maria wiped her tears with the back of her hand, overwhelmed by emotion. She glanced at the car again, its polished surface gleaming under the sun, and then back at Adrian. Why are you doing this for me? She asked quietly, her voice filled with genuine wonder. Adrian smiled, his expression softening. Because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness, or bravery, can change lives. Yours changed mine, Maria. And now, I want to help change yours. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to pause, letting the gravity of the moment sink in. Maria realized that this wasn't just about the car. It was about validation, recognition, and the power of human connection. Someone like Adrian, with all his wealth and influence, had taken the time to acknowledge her humanity and value her contribution. That meant more to her than any material gift ever could. After a long silence, Maria nodded slowly, accepting his gesture with humility and grace. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I'll never forget this. Adrian handed her the bouquet of flowers, which she accepted with trembling hands. Take care of yourself, Maria, he said warmly. We'll talk soon. With that, he walked away, leaving Maria standing beside the Rolls-Royce, tears streaming down her face. She stared at the car, still struggling to believe it was real. But deep down, she knew that this was more than just a gift. It was a reminder that even the smallest voices can make the biggest impact. The days that followed were a whirlwind for Maria. She couldn't stop thinking about the events of the past week, the warning she had given Adrian, the note on the door, and now the Rolls-Royce sitting in front of her modest apartment building. It was surreal, almost like stepping into someone else's life. People in her neighborhood began to notice the car too, and whispers spread quickly. Neighbors who barely acknowledged her before suddenly stopped to chat, asking how she'd come to own such a luxury vehicle. At first, Maria felt uncomfortable with all the attention. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, especially not for something as extravagant as owning a Rolls-Royce. But as time passed, she realized that the car was more than just a gift. It symbolized hope. It reminded her that even someone like her, working tirelessly day after day without much recognition, could make a difference. And it gave her courage to dream bigger than she ever had before. Meanwhile, Adrian was dealing with his own storm. The information he had uncovered about Victoria was far worse than he had imagined. The private investigator sent him detailed reports every few hours, each one adding another layer to the chilling picture forming in Adrian's mind. Victoria hadn't just manipulated wealthy men. She had orchestrated their disappearances with cold precision. Adrian read through bank statements showing large sums transferred to offshore accounts shortly after her previous husbands vanished. He found emails and text messages hinting at plans she'd made to isolate him financially and emotionally over the years. But the most damning piece of evidence came late one night, a recording from a security camera in Aspen. Adrian had been suspicious about why Victoria insisted they go there for the weekend, so he asked the PI to dig deeper. What they found was horrifying. Footage of Victoria meeting with a man at a secluded cabin. Their conversation was muffled, but the body language said it all. They were planning something sinister, and Adrian was clearly the target. Adrian sat, alone in his study, replaying the video clip over and over again. His hands trembled as he clenched the edge of his desk. How could he have been so blind? For years he had let Victoria control his decisions, believing her love was genuine. Now he saw her for what she truly was, a master manipulator who viewed him as nothing more than a means to an end. The next morning, Adrian decided it was time to confront her. He called Victoria and arranged for dinner at their penthouse later, that evening. When she arrived, dressed impeccably as always, Adrian greeted her with forced politeness. They sat down at the dining table, where candles flickered softly against the backdrop of Central Park. At first, Victoria seemed relaxed, chatting casually about trivial things, but Adrian cut straight to the point. "Victoria," he began, his tone calm but firm. "We need to talk." She raised an eyebrow, feigning curiosity. "About what, darling?" He slid a folder across the table toward her. Inside were copies of the documents and photos collected by the private investigator. Victoria froze when she saw them, her mask of charm slipping for just a second. Then, as if snapping out of a trance, she laughed nervously. "What is this nonsense?" she asked, trying to sound dismissive. "Are you accusing me of something?" Adrian leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "I think you know exactly what I'm accusing you of. Your past marriages, the insurance policy, the trip to Aspen, it's all connected. You've been playing games, Victoria, and I'm done being your pawn." For the first time since he'd met her, Adrian saw fear flash in Victoria's eyes. She tried to maintain her composure, stammering excuses and deflecting blame. But Adrian wasn't buying any of it. He pressed on, laying out every detail the investigation had uncovered. By the time he finished, Victoria's facade had completely crumbled. Gone was the polished socialite. In her place stood a desperate woman cornered by the truth. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Do you think anyone will believe you over me? You're nothing without me, Adrian." Her words might have scared him once, but not anymore. Adrian simply shook his head. "It's over, Victoria. Pack your things and leave. If you try to fight me, I'll make sure the authorities see everything, including the security footage." Realizing she had no choice, Victoria stormed out of the penthouse, slamming the door behind her. Adrian immediately called security to ensure she wouldn't return. Within hours, police officers arrived, armed with warrants based on the evidence Adrian provided. Victoria was arrested that same night, charged with fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. News outlets exploded with headlines about the scandal, painting her as a modern-day femme fatale who preyed on wealthy men. As the chaos unfolded, Maria remained blissfully unaware of the full extent of what had happened. She continued her daily routine, though now with a newfound sense of purpose. The Rolls-Royce parked outside her home served as a constant reminder of the power of speaking up, even when it felt risky or insignificant. She started dreaming bigger, about starting a non-profit organization to help single mothers gain financial independence, inspired by her own struggles as a working mother. One crisp autumn morning, Adrian surprised Maria again. This time he showed up at her doorstep unannounced, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Mind if I join you for a walk?" he asked with a warm smile. Maria nodded, still slightly intimidated by his presence despite everything that had happened. They strolled through the park nearby, sipping their coffee as leaves crunched underfoot. Adrian listened intently as Maria shared stories about her life, her hopes, her challenges, and her dreams for the future. He learned about her desire to start a nonprofit and offered to fund it entirely. "I can't accept that," Maria protested, shaking her head. "You've already done so much for me." "And you've done so much for me," Adrian replied sincerely. "Let me help you give back to others. That's what this is all about, isn't it?" Tears welled up in Maria's eyes as she realized the depth of his kindness. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she could make a real difference, not just for herself, but for countless others like her. By the time they parted ways, Maria felt a renewed sense of determination. Life had thrown her curveballs, but she had faced them head-on. And now, thanks to a simple act of bravery, she was ready to step into a brighter chapter, one filled with hope, gratitude, and endless possibilities. Months passed, and life began to settle into a new rhythm for both Maria and Adrian. For Maria, the days that followed her unexpected encounter with Adrian were unlike anything she had ever experienced. The Rolls-Royce parked outside her modest apartment building became a talking point in the neighborhood. But it wasn't just the car that changed things. It was the way Maria carried herself. She walked taller, spoke with more confidence, and started seeing possibilities where once there had only been limitations. With Adrian's support, Maria's dream of starting a non-profit organization began to take shape. She spent countless hours researching programs, meeting with community leaders, and sketching out plans for what would eventually become Hope Rising, an initiative aimed at helping single mothers gain financial independence. The name itself came from a conversation she'd had with Adrian during one of their walks through Central Park. "Hope is what keeps us going," he had said, "and when we rise together, we can change the world." The first step was securing a space for the nonprofit. Adrian helped fund the purchase of a small office in a bustling part of town, close to public transportation so it would be accessible to everyone. Maria worked tirelessly to transform the space into something warm and inviting, a place where women could feel safe, supported, and empowered. Bright yellow walls replaced the drab white ones, motivational posters lined the hallways, and shelves were stocked with books on entrepreneurship, parenting, and personal growth. Maria also reached out to local businesses and organizations to build partnerships. A nearby bakery agreed to provide free snacks for workshops, while a tech company offered free coding classes for participants interested in learning digital skills. Slowly but surely, Hope Rising became a beacon of hope for women struggling to make ends meet. Single mothers who had once felt invisible found themselves surrounded by a community that believed in them and pushed them to believe in themselves. Adrian, too, underwent a transformation. After cutting ties with Victoria, he made a conscious effort to live differently. He sold off some of his luxury properties and redirected the funds toward sustainable technologies and philanthropic ventures. His focus shifted from accumulating wealth to creating meaningful impact. He started attending fewer high-profile events and spent more time mentoring young entrepreneurs, many of whom reminded him of himself when he was just starting out. One evening, as Maria sat in her cozy living room sipping tea, she reflected on how drastically her life had changed. Just a year ago, she had been an ordinary cleaning lady, working long hours to keep her family afloat. Now she was running a non-profit organization that was changing lives, including her own. The journey hadn't been easy. There were moments of doubt, sleepless nights, and challenges that seemed insurmountable. But every hurdle had taught her something valuable: resilience, patience, and the importance of leaning on others when needed. Adrian often joined her for dinner or coffee, and their conversations ranged from deep philosophical discussions to lighthearted banter about everyday life. Despite their vastly different backgrounds, they shared a bond forged through trust and mutual respect. Adrian admired Maria's determination and humility, qualities he felt were missing in many people he encountered in his elite circles. Maria, on the other hand, appreciated Adrian's willingness to listen and learn, even though he had everything most people could ever want. Their friendship inspired those around them. Neighbors who had initially gossiped about Maria's sudden windfall now praised her for using her resources wisely. Volunteers at Hope Rising marveled at how someone, like Adrian, a billionaire, could be so down-to-earth and genuinely invested in making a difference. Together, they proved that wealth and status didn't define a person's worth. It was their actions that mattered most. As winter approached, Hope Rising hosted its first annual gala to raise awareness and funds for future projects. The event was held in a grand ballroom adorned with twinkling fairy lights and vibrant floral arrangements. Women who had benefited from the program stood up to share their stories, each one more inspiring than the last. There were tears, laughter, and standing ovations as the audience celebrated not just their successes, but the courage it took to overcome adversity. Maria stood at the podium near the end of the evening, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her chest. When I started this journey, she began, looking out at the sea of faces before her. I never imagined I'd be standing here today. I'm just a cleaning lady, an ordinary woman trying to make ends meet. But I've learned something important along the way. No act of kindness is too small and no voice is too insignificant to make a difference. She paused, glancing at Adrian sitting in the front row, his expression filled with pride. This organization wouldn't exist without the support of good people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And tonight, we celebrate not just what we've achieved, but what we can achieve together if we rise above fear and doubt. The room erupted in applause and Maria stepped back, overwhelmed by emotion. For the first time in her life, she truly felt seen, not because of the car or the nonprofit, but because of who she was at her core. A kind, hard-working woman who dared to speak up when it mattered most. That night, as Maria drove home in her Rolls-Royce, she realized how far she had come, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. Life had thrown her curveballs, but she had faced them head-on, refusing to let fear dictate her choices. And now, she was ready to embrace whatever lay ahead, knowing that she had the strength and support to navigate it all. Little did she know the best was yet to come. As the months rolled by, Maria's nonprofit organization, Hope Rising, grew into something far bigger than she had ever imagined. What started as a small initiative in a modest office space soon expanded to multiple locations across the city. Women from all walks of life came seeking help. Single mothers juggling jobs and childcare, widows struggling to rebuild their lives, and even young girls determined to break free from cycles of poverty. Each person who walked through the doors carried their own story, but they all shared one thing in common: a desire to rise above their circumstances. Maria worked tirelessly alongside her team, which now included volunteers, mentors, and professionals, offering everything from financial literacy classes to mental health counseling. The program wasn't just about teaching skills, it was about empowering women to believe in themselves again. Many participants credited Maria not only for the practical tools they gained, but also for the sense of community and belonging they found within the walls of Hope Rising. For many, it felt like coming home. Adrian remained deeply involved in the project, though he preferred to stay behind the scenes. He attended planning meetings, provided funding for new initiatives, and occasionally stopped by to meet the women whose lives were being transformed. One day, while touring the expanded facility with Maria, he overheard a young mother sharing her story during a group session. She spoke about how she'd been on the verge of giving up until she discovered Hope Rising. The woman's voice trembled as she described the moment she realized she wasn't alone, that there were people willing to stand beside her no matter what. Adrian turned to Maria after the session, his eyes glistening. "You've created something extraordinary here," he said softly. "This isn't just changing individual lives, it's changing families, communities, generations." Maria smiled, humbled by his words. "We couldn't have done it without you," she replied. "Your support made this possible." "But your vision brought it to life," Adrian countered. "Never forget that, Maria. You're the heart of this place." The bond between them continued to deepen, built on mutual respect and admiration. They weren't just benefactor and beneficiary. They were friends who genuinely cared about each other. Their conversations often drifted beyond work-related topics, touching on dreams, fears, and aspirations. Adrian confided in Maria about his struggles with loneliness after leaving Victoria, admitting that he sometimes felt out of place in his own world. Maria, in turn, opened up about her childhood growing up in a cramped apartment with 5 siblings, always dreaming of a better future, but never imagining it would look like this. Their friendship became a source of strength for both of them. Adrian admired Maria's ability to find joy in the simplest things: a warm cup of coffee, a child's laughter, or the sight of autumn leaves swirling in the wind. In return, Maria appreciated Adrian's humility despite his immense wealth and influence. Together, they reminded each other of the importance of staying grounded, no matter where life took them. One crisp spring morning, Maria woke up feeling unusually reflective. It had been nearly 2 years since she warned Adrian about traveling with his wife, setting off a chain of events that changed both their lives forever. As she sipped her tea on the balcony overlooking her quiet neighborhood, she thought back to that day, the unease she felt overhearing Victoria's threats, the courage it took to speak up, and the shock of receiving such an extravagant gift. In return, she realized something profound. Bravery didn't always mean doing grand, heroic acts. Sometimes it meant trusting your instincts and speaking your truth, even when you feared nobody would listen. Her warning to Adrian might have seemed small at the time, but it had rippled outward, saving lives and transforming futures, including her own. Later that week, Adrian invited Maria to join him for lunch at a cozy restaurant tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. Over plates of homemade pasta and freshly baked bread, they talked about the past, present, and future. Adrian shared his plans to expand his philanthropic efforts globally, focusing on education and environmental sustainability. Maria, meanwhile, revealed her dream of turning Hope Rising into a nationwide movement, inspiring women in every corner of the country to take charge of their destinies. "You know," Adrian said thoughtfully as they lingered over dessert, "you remind me of why I started my business in the first place. Back then, I believed technology could solve problems and improve lives. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that purpose. Meeting you and seeing what you've accomplished has reignited my passion for making a difference." Maria nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. "And you've reminded me that kindness has no limits. Whether it's giving someone a second chance or believing in them when they don't believe in themselves, we all have the power to change the world in our own way." After lunch, they took a leisurely walk through the park, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the sound of birds chirping overhead. As they strolled side by side, Maria glanced at the Rolls-Royce parked nearby, its silver surface gleaming under the sunlight. She chuckled softly, shaking her head. "I still can't believe that car belongs to me," she admitted. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life." Adrian laughed, his tone light but sincere. "Well, get used to it because you deserve every bit of happiness it brings. And remember, none of this would have happened if you hadn't trusted yourself enough to speak up." Maria paused, looking at him with a mix of awe and gratitude. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice filled with emotion. "Not just for the car or the nonprofit, but for listening when I spoke, even though I was just a cleaning lady. You'll always be more than that to me," Adrian replied firmly. "You're a friend, a mentor, and an inspiration. Don't ever forget that." As they parted ways later that afternoon, Maria returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. Life had thrown her challenges, but it had also given her gifts beyond measure: friendships, opportunities, and a platform to make a difference. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she faced it with hope and determination, knowing she wasn't walking it alone. That evening, as Maria sat on her balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the bustling streets of New York to the polished floors of Adrian's penthouse, from whispered warnings to luxury cars and non-profit organizations, her life had taken twists and turns she could never have predicted. Yet through it all, one thing remained constant: the belief that even the smallest voices can echo loudly in the grand tapestry of life. And so, Maria embraced the future with open arms, ready to continue rising. Not just for herself, but for everyone whose life she touched along the way.